Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on another common yet very important coaching topic, coaching the poor communicator. My name is Stephanie, and I've been a part of the administrative team at Coaching Out of the Box for the past 5 years, and I'm excited to be the moderator for this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping items. We'd love to hear your comments, questions, and insights in the chat. Please ensure it is set to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. To start, we'd love to hear where you're zooming in from today. Please add your location and say hi in the chat. This webinar earns all in attendance 1 ICF CCE, and to earn this, you must be in attendance for the entire hour. Without further ado, let me hand the floor over to the lovely and talented Rosa, who will be leading our discussion today on coaching the poor communicator.
Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome, everyone. Again, I was looking as you put into the chat, we have like Kenya and Greece and Ottawa and San Jose and like Thunder. Wow, I'm excited. All right, let's dive in because it's an hour and we're talking about communication, which, you know, sometimes takes a long, can take years to learn about and talk about and master. So let's dive in. As Stephanie said, before we dive in, I'm stopping that. Use the chat. Use the chat to share questions. I'll be asking throughout our time together. I'll be asking certain questions. I'll be asking you to share your experiences. I'll be asking for opinions. Share. We want this to not only be valuable, we want it to be interactive. We want it to be real for you. So that's the fun part when you're sharing your questions and comments. And both Stephanie and I will be checking the chat. And hopefully we won't miss anything. So let's dive in. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about, some of you already know this. Some of you, I see names that I'm very familiar with. I want to tell you a little bit about Coaching Out of the Box. Some of you may know about Coaching Out of the Box, and I want to talk about what's coming up. I'll introduce myself in a little bit, a bit more about me. I'm one of the coach facilitators at Coaching Out of the Box, and there's this beautiful mission and vision around Coaching Out of the Box. It's like, what if, that starts with a question always for coaches. What if everyone had coaching skills? How would that impact? How would that just make everything better? And have that dialogue. And the mission and vision is, we want to make sure people do. We might want to make it easier for people to get those skills and create that impact in their worlds. So here's how you can interact. Here's what's coming up for Coaching Out of the Box. We kind of break it up until you can take it. You can take one of our programs. You can take our personal groundwork, our CKA, or fundamentals, or coaching skills practicum courses to get credits to just sharpen your saw as a coach. You can also take our fast track program. It's starting May 5th. Fast track program is moving you through, giving you the educational credits to move towards an ACC, and it's fun. And I'm biased because I love the facilitators I get to work with. So for some of you, it's also, hey, how do I change the culture in my organization? How do I get these skills in my organization? So if that's something that you're looking at, of how do you bring one of these courses or 555 program or any of these programs into your organization, contact us. We want to talk to you. We want to make it easy for you to help those in the organization gather the skills and change the conversations, change the culture, make a bigger impact. You want to find out more, you want to talk about it. What's great for you? What does this look like? How can this work? Schedule a call with Allison Hendren. Allison is our CEO, or the founder of Coaching Out of the Box. She is one of the most passionate people I've ever met around coaching, because she has seen what it does for the person, for the person who's gathering these skills, and the impact that they then have. She was going to join us today, and she sends her absolute regards to everyone. And so if you want to have a conversation, reach out. Allison, her link to book a conversation with her is right there. You'll be getting these slides, and that link will be live. So you can link any of these things, or go to our website, coachingoutofthebox.com. Talks about not only the programs, but the impact that the programs that we offer have made. Blogs, you get registration to webinars like this one. And these are all on the website. So if you're looking for different information, it's just a treasure trove of information. So I'd encourage you to go. So let's dive in. By first, that's me. I am Rosa Edinga, and like I said, I am a coach facilitator out of Coaching Out of the Box. I am also the founder and CEO of Life Unmuted, that works with entrepreneurs and coaches to just show up as their whole selves in their business, in their coaching practice, as well as balancing the rest of their lives. So communications is a huge passion of mine. I love it. You can read all that. I'm not going to read all that. Last part is something that's really dear to my heart. I love, love, love creating with skills, my coaching skills, and just my, just the passion around it. Love empowering people to dream audaciously, dream big, be more resilient, and just show up fully. So, like I said, communications is one of those things that is dear to my heart. So let's dive in. Coaching the poor communicator. So as I talk about the goals for today, we have a couple of goals for today. I'm going to ask you to use the chat and answer my question. When you think of poor communicator, what comes to mind? What kind of things come to mind when you hear the words poor communicator? Throw them in the chat. Love to hear some of the comments as I go through the goals for today. And then I'm going to come back because I just want to hear again what that poor communicator looks like for you or what comes to mind. Obviously, you all pressed register because it was something that was near to you. So I'd love to hear about that. So our goals for today. As always, we start with us. So one of those is about the biases we may carry as coaches as we walk into a conversation with someone who may not be the best communicator, may not be the most effective communicator. Talk about some common barriers to communication, how they interplay, what they are and how they interplay. Talk about, I want you to share your experiences. Many of you are coaches who sit across or in conversation with those, who are saying, hey, I'm not a most effective communicator. I want to hear your experiences. I want to hear your questions. We all love sharing with each other. This is a community. Want you to bring it in. Also, I'm going to add some questions that will help you put those in your toolbox to say, here's some questions that you may want to ask as a coach to get that conversation started, to get that awareness started, to help move your client, as we do, from where they are to where they want to be. So I want to just, over talker. Yes, over talker, lack of acknowledgement what others are saying. Argumentative. Yeah. Ooh, oh, goodness. Don't want to go there yet. We can't start with self until okay. Technology doesn't always want to communicate with me. I'm just reading your chat on a different screen. So if I'm looking that way, people who assume we can read his or her mind, they're unclear. Yeah, a lot of self-questioning. Does this make sense? They're defensive. Yeah. So it's interesting what comes to mind when we hear the words poor communicator. So as we always do, where we wanted to start today was start with you. We all know I'm assuming, I'm going to make two assumptions. Here's my first assumption. I'm assuming that when we're talking about coaching with a poor communicator, someone who's says I'm an effective communicator, they're willingly sitting in that chair. They're willingly participating in a conversation. It's not someone has deemed them a poor communicator, and they're there willingly. That's my assumption. As we go forward today, that's the assumption I'm working on, that they willingly want to be there. Because that, as we all know, that just facilitates the conversation. Coaching the Uncoachable is a different webinar. You can check it out on our website. We talk about that. The second assumption I'm making is those of you who are coming in are either practicing coaches coaches within organizations, within their own organizations, leaders who use coaching skills. So that's made those assumptions. So sometimes when I say that, that's the assumption I'm making. And we all have to start with self. So when we think of, that's why I asked the question, what comes to mind when you think of a poor communicator? Before the conversation even starts, we have to think about, what are we bringing to the conversation as coaches? And how does that impact the conversation? How does that impact how we show up for the conversation? So again, we talk about, where we could go. This is where we could go, or we might go. So this is about raising our awareness as coaches of how we show up. So you hear poor communication. There are words that come up for us of like, ooh, argumentative, ooh, they're the person who insert. And sometimes there's a judgment there. Who doesn't want to be a good communicator? Who wants to be a poor communicator? Sometimes we walk in with the assumption of, well, you know what, let's do this. No one wants to live there. So let's help them out. Let's help them. Let's move them. Let's coach them, fix them. And I say coach in that quotation marks because sometimes it's like used as something we do to someone else. There's a tendency, or there may be a tendency, if our judgments or our perceptions bring out the, let's improve this person, let's help this person. Sometimes without even knowing, unconsciously, we bring that bias, we're out to fix them. We have to help them. We have to help them, move them forward. And for many of us who choose this as a profession, or even just who align ourselves with the conversations that happen in coaching, we want to serve. We want to help them. We want to help somebody just get better and not be a poor communicator and be heard. And that sometimes means we do more work than the client. We do more work than the person sitting in that chair. And, I will often say, as I'm talking to other coaches or mentoring, it's, you can't want it more than they do. So we have to stay in that coach space to hold that person capable and not want to go in and give them, suggestions, because then it becomes our agenda. In service to, or what we think is in service to the other person. Like, oh yes, we have to make you a rich communicator, not a poor communicator. You don't want to stay there. Or you make them feel wrong. Again, whether that's slightly intentionally or unintentionally, it's, oh, if you're not a good communicator, sit down in my chair. Let's talk about that. This is all to say, hold those things, be aware of those things, of what we bring as coaches to the conversation when we're talking to someone who may not be the most effective communicator. This is all about those places. We talk about it in our personal groundwork course. This is about that place of, how do you show up as a coach? What are your judgments? What are your biases? What do you have to leave at the door in order to be in that coach spirit, in order to be of service to the other person and hold them completely capable? So here's where a coach goes. And many of you do this. Many of you do this naturally, is be accepting of where they are, meet them where they are. When we talk about, you'll see the GP on the sides. That's what we call our guiding principles. When we talk about it through Coaching Out of the Box, it's our 555. We introduce the guiding principles of, here are the principles of how you show up as a coach, because that's just as important as the competencies. It's just as important as those, the process we follow. Be curious. For me, this includes being curious with yourself. As a coach, we will all be in that space that we learn in each conversation. And this is also that space of like, be curious about what comes up for you as you go into a conversation with a poor communicator. Of what judgments am I bringing? What biases am I bringing? Be curious about those. And this is about being supportive. Again, we're making an assumption that someone has come to you and said, look, my communication isn't as effective as I want it to be. And this is about strength-based, supportive, and helping them move forward and out of that. Coaches will start, as many of you do naturally, from their agenda, and to facilitate their awareness, because this is about them. So, of course, where do we start? Is that why place. So here, again, are just 4 ways or 4 reasons we communicate. To inform someone, to give them information, to persuade them. I want you to, maybe look at it from my point of view, or maybe by my phone, or to make a request of something I need, or to build a relationship, to build that trust. These can be, intermingled, they can be woven. Someone can say, well, really in this conversation, it's context-based. Different conversations have different intents. For me, what this speaks to is, if you look at the process of a coaching conversation, it's, so what do you want to get out of it? What would being a better communicator, a more effective communicator, why is that important to you? And this is what that speaks to. What would being a more effective communicator allow you to do, enable you to do? This allows you to dig in a little deeper to the person who's sitting across from you and find out why would this be important to them now? And, dig into some of those reasons. And so making sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. So I want to kind of, again, move into that place of, we've established, all right, there's a problem. Someone has come to you as a coach and said, look, my communication skills are not where I want them to be. And you have started with self. You've, shown up as the coach. And then as you get into the conversation, it's like, hey, what will this allow you to do? What are the reasons? What does the communication allow you to do? And then, of course, we start talking about, so what are the barriers? What are those barriers that are keeping you from communicating? What are the barriers for keeping you from being heard? And it's also about keeping these in mind as a coach, looking for clues as a person's talking on which one of these is could be the biggest barrier to whatever situation they're bringing, or whatever that person is bringing to you. I'll go through these really quickly, each of them very quickly, because I want them, my intention is to bring them top of mind, to say there are different types, and to expand that lens even, to zoom out and then zoom back in of what could be in the way, because that's that first step of what's in the way. So we talk about 7 common barriers being physical, and again, I'll go through each of them. Perceptual, that's a big one. Cultural, emotional, language, gender, and interpersonal. So I'm going to start with physical. So in the before times, as many of you are likely working from home or working in different places, or social distancing, or a combination of those things. But even now, when you think about the physical barriers, we communicate sometimes with our physical spaces, whether those are, closed office doors, or if anyone's, I worked for a large, I was gonna say organization, I'll call them an organization. They were a public sector organization. And the physical spaces, the physical offices, I remember it used to be that you would be assigned an office, and they would count out the tiles to see how big your office would be. And if you went to the executive suites, there would always be the leather chairs. So that physicality also speaks, going down that long hallway to the VP's office, that speaks to people. And sometimes that's a barrier. The big desk in between is a barrier for someone to communicate thoughtfully, intentionally. Whether it's physical barriers, and sometimes in the digital age, it's also technology of, whether it's how do you communicate, through Zoom or Skype or. So keeping that in mind as you're digging in as a coach to say, like, where are the barriers? What is kind of influencing this person's ability or inability to communicate effectively? As I go through these, I want you to think about, and I'll stop at the end of these barriers. I want to hear in your practices, in your conversation, which of these barriers, as I go through them, which ones come to mind as being the most, I don't want to say the most popular, but the one that happens the most often. So we talk about physical, and then there's perceptual. Our perception is reality in most cases. So we see the world the way we see it. And it's not always the way other people see the world. This is where that beautiful curiosity skill comes in, of looking at how our thoughts, the assumptions we're making, the perceptions we're making about people. I think we've been in conversation with someone where, I know when I think about a situation, I was in a big boardroom, again, in the before times, when we used to sit in boardrooms, and was talking about something, and the person who was across was not listening verbally. You could see it. You could just kind of see them looking down. And I made a whole bunch of assumptions that impacted my ability to speak. Started stammering, started speaking faster, because obviously my perception, this person found me boring, and then just cascaded into all of the assumptions that I was making that then impacted my ability to speak. This person was just dealing with a family issue on their phone. That later came to find out. So again, this is about that space of, as coaches, in that awareness phase, in that evokes awareness phase of our conversation, to dig deeper into, wait a second, what's impacting this person's ability to be heard, to speak up? What perceptions are they holding about another person? What assumptions are they holding? And to ask those questions, again, all in service to digging into what's the root of, what's the biggest barrier of their inability to not communicate as effectively as they want. Going back to that physical, yes, time zone differences. You know what? I would have never even thought of that. And that's brilliant. Of whether it's that barrier, or keeping those things in mind, of saying, how do I make it easier for me to communicate with others when there are time zone barriers, when there are, barriers like walls, but also the absence of the physical person. And how do you communicate when my camera's off? Love those things. Thank you for that. Yeah. This, I think, is for me, and we'll talk about how some of these intermingle. For me, the perception place is a really big one that I find with a lot with those that I get to work with my clients, of what's the perception here? How do your assumptions about how someone perceives you impact your ability to communicate? How are your perceptions or assumptions about someone else impact how you communicate with them? And we'll talk about even that. Again, they interplay in the cultural and in all of the rest of them. So cultural. We are wired. We are wired from when, there were saber-toothed tigers, to want to remain part of a group that gave us safety. And in some cases, we haven't gone very far from that. So we will use language. If I talk about an organizational culture, a social culture, we use language within that culture to belong. And sometimes that's a barrier to our ability to communicate or be heard. And I'll explain. So not only in, when you think of culturally, sometimes that is different languages, different cultures behind those languages. In some cultures, looking at me straight in the eye is a sign of trusted relationship. In some cultures, it is a sign of aggression. So this is about being aware of there are cultural differences, national cultural differences, and there are also cultural differences in how we speak, in like the organizational cultural differences. Some of us probably been in organizations where the norms that we take with us and how people spoke, or how, colloquial, or how professional, or how, what was acceptable language changes. So sometimes it takes us a little while to get used to it. And we use language that may or may not work with someone else. Again, we adapt some of those norms in a culture. So as a coach, when you're sitting across from someone and you're having that conversation, understanding, getting a bit into like, tell me a little bit about, or hearing that, picking up on those barriers as someone is explaining their situation, as you're getting to that, evoke the awareness, as you're getting them to tell the story and get deeper into the root. This is also one of those barriers that you're like, is this a cultural thing? Is this part of the organizational culture? Again, in service to them, helping identify where the barriers are. So then once you know where the barriers are and you know what your goal is, it's easier to move forward towards that. Acronym. Don't even get me started. And that's why I look at even cultural and language acronyms. Yes, in an organization can be big barriers. I worked, the large organization I worked with, I kept saying, can you have a dictionary of those acronyms? So that, I understand when you're throwing out whole sentences with acronyms. In some cases, it can also be exclusionary. If you're using those, it's like, well, if you understand, you're in the group. And if you don't understand, you're out of the group. And these are all things that sometimes we just do unintentionally because it's just part of the way we work. So this is all about your using the skills that you have to help the person who you're speaking to be more intentional about the way they speak, be more aware and then intentional. Yes, group, family, whatever organization. And when I say organization, in some of my stories, I'll talk about organization as being a business organization. But organization is any group of people that organize, family, friend group, church group, community, whatever that looks like. So that's our thank you for that. So I'm going to move to emotional. And again, this comes from, sometimes this is the place sometimes I like to play. We get into that place of understanding the emotions that come up when people communicate. And for some, speaking to others, again, don't talk to strangers, as we talk here, but even just speaking to others in organization, in wherever their workplace is, wherever their family is, speaking to others comes with a bit of fear. Or whatever emotion comes up. I think about people who speak for a living and they say, my God, that's the biggest fear, of speaking in front of groups of people. I am a firm believer that when you communicate, it's again, vocal energy that you're putting out. It's your energy that you're putting out in voice form. So that, depending on what it is, can be very vulnerable for someone. Sharing your ideas, sharing who you are, sharing your story, and understanding the emotions that come up for someone when they speak to people who they see as powerful, whatever that looks like for them. Dig deeper into this, find out what someone is speaking on, that, what happens emotionally for them, because that impacts their ability to speak clearly, or it impacts the other person's ability to hear them, which is that two-way communications place. I want to get to Kathleen's comment because I saw it pop up. Leaders who have worked in a command and control organization moving to a role in a more collaborative organization, communication challenges galore. Too bad there wasn't a bold in the chat. Yes. Again, it's that, talk even whether cultural, but even an emotional place of these are intertwined. These barriers are meant to, put a stake in and allow us to see this as barriers, or to look at the barriers as groups, but we're human. So some of these are intertwined. So if someone is, I'll take Kathleen's example, if someone is a command and control leader and goes to another organization or shifts in the organization, and if I am used to you doing what I ask you to do because of my position in the organization, and now we shift and you don't just do it because I tell you to, I then start to see that as you're not listening. And you're, it's a disrespect thing. So I'm loving that, because again, it brings that emotional piece of how you do that. Sorry, my friends. Okay, love.
Do it. Come on.
My apologies. My son is coming in, and this is what happens now. So I'll just take a moment to just tell him to leave. There we go. Excellent. So yeah, that emotional place of understanding what comes up for us, and maybe understanding what comes up for the other person, and what we say, and just seeing that, helping us as coaches see what the other person, or help them see what's going on when they communicate. Now we talk about language. We talked a little bit about in all of this, the language we use can also be a barrier to the way we communicate, or having someone really hear what we want to say. We talk about this a little bit in that cultural place. How we communicate, what we use, again, is all about, in some cases, how we exclude. Sometimes we use buzzwords. Sometimes we also use nuanced words, where in a translation of the actual English language, or a different language, that nuance may be lost. So it's just being aware. Again, this isn't about sitting with someone saying you have to change every word you say, or it's that whole just being aware. That's what we do as coaches. We hold up the mirror and say, how are you more aware of how you communicate and the impact you have, in order to move you towards what you need, or what you want, or what your goal is. The other thing about language is, and I love that statement, we speak in a language that we use. We speak in a language we understand. We assume that everyone else speaks that language. And I don't just mean whatever your native tongue is. I don't just mean the language, like the lingua franca that you're like, I'm talking about organizational language, or just colloquial language, or some of the language that we use. We speak that way. And then when we're creating our awareness, opening our awareness, and helping someone open that awareness as you're working with them as a coach, to look at how the other person wants to be communicated with, how they communicate, looking at their clues, or just asking, hey, allowing, that space and that awareness to then potentially have a conversation to say, realize that our communication is going this way, back and forth and otherwise. I feel like we're not speaking the same language. Let's have a conversation about how would you prefer. In some cases, that's say, I'd prefer this in an email. I prefer this in a text. I prefer this in a PowerPoint, whatever that is. That's also the delivery model, is also language. One more point I want to make about language is sometimes it's also just our use of different types of language, and I'll explain. I remember there was a time in my career when I was working in an organization. It was a high stress, very issues management position that I held, and things had to be moved fast. Decisions had to be moved fast. Everything was fast, and it was like issue. And many of you were like, yes, I hear you, Rosa. Fires all the time. And I found that as I stayed in that role, my language changed. It became more words about battle. It was like around battle. So we have to prepare, we have to, defend, we have to, it was in just normal professional language, but we have to defend ourselves against this. We have to make sure we're bulletproof. We have to, kind of shoot first. And I didn't realize this, but it was part of the, culture. It was part of what I was using language like that. And language like that, sometimes it was jarring for some to hear, battlefield, and they would then respond in kind. What I was saying was lost in that language. It wasn't coming through because that people were like, oh my gosh, I'm jarred by this language you're using. For us as coaches, it's just creating that awareness for someone to be like, how is that, using those questions and your observations and saying, how is that impacting? How could that be impacting? How might that be impacting? Was that your intention? I want to go to the chat because I kind of see it blowing up. Oh, Nikki, you bring up such a beautiful point of sometimes the intent is very different than the impact. Yes. And there's that beautiful saying of just because you hurt my feelings, it's like you don't get to discard my feelings being hurt, even though it wasn't your intention. And of course I mutilated. I said it was such a beautiful saying and then I mutilated it. But it's that place of, owning your intention. So I always talk about owning your intention as a communicator. What do you want to say? And if it comes across to someone and you have an unintentional impact, is own it, own that impact, and then mitigate. But that's, being aware that you may say something that impacts negatively someone is something that, again, is in the back of your mind as an intentional communicator. So thanks for bringing that up. Oh my gosh, you guys are so awesome. I love it. Sorry, I'm just reading it. It was a really neat quote. I'm going to go back to it, Emily. In my current organization uses a lot of insular language that makes us appear us versus them. Like we have an insiders club and others aren't welcome. We even use, yes. And sometimes that even being seen as outsiders, we're renegades, we're the cowboys. That worked for a boss once that kept saying that, you know what, Rosa, we're the cowboys. We're out in the Wild West. We don't play by the rules. And I'm like, actually we have rules. There are rules. And I think about his communication style. It may be effective for some, wasn't effective for others. So yeah, gosh, I love this. Now, Stephanie, if I'm missing something in some of those places or some great comments, please let me know because they're going at fast and furiously. And I love that. That's the best part. Now, I think, Darlene, something you had said, and I want to highlight that for anyone who's listening, is saying the other person's name verbally and the correct way. And sometimes the most correct way to say it is, I don't want to say your name incorrectly. Can you say it for me? And ask them that question. For us, some of these skills are easier because we use them on a daily basis as coaches, to being that curious, to saying, I'm going to hold the other person capable. I'm going to be curious and I'm going to be open to the fact that I don't have the answer. How do you say your name? Again, it creates that trust, which is the basis of communication. We'll talk about that a little bit interpersonal. Looking at the time, I want to love that. The reason I smiled is because I moved it to gender. And this is, for some, a very sensitive topic. And this is one of those, as I was looking at it and putting it together, this is one that really highlighted for me that these barriers aren't just standalone. We're not just one-dimensional people. Our communication isn't one-dimensional, nor are our barriers. So, there is brain research that shows the differences between speech patterns and thought patterns of men and women. both can be effective communicators, both listen differently. So again, it's sometimes we're actually wired that way. Our brains are wired for different information. And sometimes the way our brain develops is we are wired by, how we grew up and, sometimes the gender roles. The perception is a big thing here as well for me. And I want to mention that in terms of gender, it's the perceptions we hold about someone because they are, whatever gender, a certain gender, they identify as a certain gender. Again, it's that us and them. These people do this, women can't do. All of that comes into play. And this is about raising those assumptions. The other piece for me around gender is whether as a coach or you're, helping an awareness of a coachee or someone you're working with, is perceptions around the word gender. And, conversations and language around gender has been evolving since people have been evolving. And there's that curiosity place. So sometimes it's, that beautiful place of bringing it back, sitting without judgment, bringing it back to the coachee in service to their communication to say, what assumptions are you making? What other information do you need? What perceptions are you bringing into this that may not serve? Or, how are your perceptions impacting the way you communicate with someone because of, beliefs you hold about gender, or that big word, or even some language that you may not know as that conversation continues and it expands in order to be more inclusive. Yes. And Marilyn, you just nail it in terms of, we have to be careful here. Gender identity is a lot more than men and women. Yes, there's not a lot of, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of graphics around that. And I want to say yes. Yes. Again, it's all about our perception. And that's why for me, those barriers come in. There's also stories. I work with a lot of women who have stories and narratives about who identify as women, who have stories and narratives about what women should do, what men should do. Men, same. There's also that fluidity in the middle of the perceptions we hold for those who don't identify in either of those two. What this is about is how you as a coach show up in curiosity, without any judgment, in service to the other person, to then hold a mirror up to them and say, so here's the goal you've shared with me on communication. Here's what you mentioned. And here's what I see as here's some observations. Here's some questions to really get into that awareness in service to them reaching that goal. Whatever that goal is, to be more, to have more influence, to have, be more persuasive, to create more deep relationships, whatever that is. Ada, I want to get to that because I just saw Ada. I love that. So I have to read it. I once had a client whom I asked, what would you like to work on today? And he answered, my car. I need to fix the exhaust. That's, I don't know. I think I may have missed some of that part, but thank you. I love this. This is great. So again, that place of barriers. And I put interpersonal and, interpersonal in terms of, hey, guess what? We talk to humans most of the time. I'm making the assumption that anyone who's sitting across from you and talking about effective communication is talking about how they can be more intentional, be more effective in their communication with people. I'm not sure what kind of coach you are. You could be a different coach of, people speaking to animals, or making those assumptions here. And interpersonal talks about relationships between people. That's how big that is. We talk about interpersonal skills. But one of the barriers that could be impacting the person you're working with, their ability to effectively communicate, is the relationship with the person. One, either their lack of relationship with the person, there's no trust, it's new, they don't know anything about them. Or the other is, guess what? The relationship we've had up to this point is the thing that brings, that impacts our ability to communicate. It could be, again, a positive or a negative thing. It's that place of helping those you work with really understand what is getting in their way. Is it again, is it a lack of trust? Is it a lack of relationship? Hey, okay, how do you create that? What do you want from that? Let's dig deeper. On the other hand, it's sometimes we speak to people as we communicate, all of us humans, we speak to people where we think they are, or where we believe they are. Best example I can share is when I'm in an emotional conversation with one of my parents. That dance we get into is I become 6 years old. So they speak to me like I'm 6, because that's, sometimes I'll act like it just to, be in that dance. But it's that understanding what it is that we bring to the relationship. What do we have? What perceptions do we have about the other person? That person stole my yogurt 4 years ago. I still hold a grudge. So I come to each conversation with that grudge, and wow, we don't communicate very well. Being a bit facetious, but it could happen. I've heard, interesting things around that. It's this, how do you as a coach begin to, see those clues as someone is sitting with you and saying, here's what an effective communicator looks like for me, or here's what an ineffective, this is where I'm having troubles communicating. And as they're sharing their stories to you, you get to suss out, you get to be like, here's what I'm observing. Let's dig a bit deep into this. Again, all in the agenda of the coachee, but it's, what assumptions are you making about the other person? How does your previous relationship impact your conversations or your relationship going forward? And it can happen either way of, what are your perceptions of just working with someone who was junior in an organization, and she had worked her way through the ranks. She was still in her mind, a junior employee in the organization, but she was in a leadership position. And many, and going back to that perception or, gender or language, they still saw her as the intern, and they would speak to her as that. And, the conversation we had, and she said she wasn't communicating very well. It wasn't effective. Deep into it, it was, asking those questions about, well, how did that previous relationship, how could that be impacting? And how could you still be playing in that dance? And how do you want to change that dance? And how do you want to change things up in order to be going back to those, the reasons for communication, to influence more, to have a better relationship, to be heard. So let me see. I often ask, how important is this relationship to you? Great question. Great question. Because many are like, I can't seem to build this relationship with someone. I can't, they just don't listen to me. It becomes this, all right, helping those that you work with zoom out and say, all right, let's go back to, what's your intention? What's your goal? What would it look like to communicate well? And then it could be, wait a second, is this, how important is this relationship to you? I love that. Let me see. I want to just, before I go into, even aware of time, before I go into the questions, is what's your role in the relationship? Oh my gosh. Does anybody just kind of say, that's one of those go-to coach questions of like, what's your role in the situation? How have you contributed? And again, that comes back to how you show up as a coach. If there's judgment that you're bringing in, it's like, well, how did you as the poor communicator? And this is about, wait a second, how do you keep yourself in that space of non-judgment, curiosity, and creating that trust in that conversation to then ask those big questions of, you know, how do you, like, what are you contributing? How are you staying in that dance? I very intentionally use that dance analogy or the metaphor to say, you know, sometimes when someone steps forward, steps one way, we step a different, we have this dance with people. And we lock ourselves in that dance when we speak to them. They say one thing, we react, they react, we relax, and then it spirals. And this is about, how do you service to those you work with, help them stop the spiral. I just see a couple of things, and you know, I apologize if I'm missing anything, anything big. Oh, Nicole, you make a great point about that gender. The current application of gender neutral term is important, but I can't believe how many people still say you guys in a group of women or mixed group. Hey, humans. Any other option is hard pattern to change for some and necessary. I love, Nicole, thank you for that. Because it is going back to, keep going back to, when we are in service, when we show up as coaches, being curious about how our language, how effectively we communicate in a conversation, what we say, the language we use, how that impacts people, how that starts potentially even excluding the person who came to us to seek some support in a safe space. Thank you for that. Asking for preferred pronouns up front, using your own signature pronouns can open that door. Nicole, great. Yes. All of this is saying, if I can say one thing about this is about, you know, driving home. Yes. You know, as a coach, how do you show up? And it's this, our role in the helping, you know, a poor communicator, coaching a poor communicator, is start with thyself. Saying, how do I show up? How do I inadvertently or unconsciously contribute? Or how am I not really being in service? Just being aware of that and being curious, and then sitting in front of someone and saying, tell me, talk to me, let it out. What is your goal? Talk to me what your barriers are. And then starting to move the conversation towards, all right, so how are you going to go over those barriers? How are you going to move forward? That's the beauty of coaching. Excellent. Thank you all for the comments. And I know there's probably many more that I've missed, and I apologize. I'm gonna, oops. So, as I promised, this all comes back to, and this will always come back to, how we show up as coaches. That's what we, Coaching the Box, do. That's what we believe in. It's how do we help? How do we support those who want to have different conversations, want to have more dialogue conversations than one-sided conversations? How do we acquire those skills? And so all the way through, I can never drive it home. It's, you know, not only about how you show up as a coach is almost as important as then how do you create that space of awareness for the other person? So wanted to share some questions. And these are just some. Some of you have shared some fantastic questions. I'm going to move my little panel over. What are the indicators you might be a poor communicator? How do they define poor communicator? What are they defining as poor or ineffective? Find out what their language is all about. Again, that language piece. What's working well? That's where we start. Let's try, like, yes, you can talk about what's not working well, how people aren't listening, how you can't speak in, but let's talk about what's going right first. And then talking about that emotional piece, what's going on inside you when you're asked to share something. In what direction would you like to improve your communication? Again, here's about checking your assumptions as a coach. Is it about listening? Is it about being heard? Is it about, not getting nervous? Is it about, what's it about? Let's dig deeper into what is the goal And really setting that, if you wanted to look at it in the ICF competencies, setting that agreement. What do you notice about body language of the people you communicate with? Again, it's all about how do you help? How do you create a space for someone to gain their own awareness and to start being aware of what's happening around them, kind of put their head up, and as they communicate, see the other side of their communication with the other person. What impact would you have if you adjusted the way that you communicated? And what can you dump that you won't miss? Love that question, because it's not about what can you put down. It's like, what can you dump? Like, what are you just going to put, like, what are you going to leave behind that you're not going to miss as you move forward to the goal of being a better communicator? And as you notice at the bottom, there is, purposely put a coaching out of the box link because there is, a booklet of 365 coaching questions. For some of us, it's love having the questions, having more questions and having some of our go-to questions are at the toolbox or having more in our toolbox. I encourage you to go check it out. These are some of those questions from there. There was a couple of other comments that I wanted to get to before we start wrapping up. How do you like others to communicate with you? Huge. Because again, as you start helping someone or supporting someone to be more intentional about their communication, it's almost natural to start thinking about how they prefer to communicate. They start to be aware of, like, what do you say? What do you do? How do you react? I want to go to, there was a beautiful question. Jackie, you had mentioned, a year into remote work, the interpersonal side of communication is really suffering for me and others in my organization. Our picture of each other have morphed and warped so much over time. Yeah, yes. This year has been one of those, not one of those, I think one of the things that have come out. Gifts, learnings, opportunities, the way you want to look at it or perception of it is to look at things like that in terms of how has our communication changed when really it's all about like digital and really quick email, meeting after meeting. There's no small talk. There's no relationship building because it's meeting and then we all get into a meeting. So there's no, hey, that's a great shirt. Conversations that happen when we're meeting in person, that small talk before or even after as we're walking through hallways, and being aware or, staring at ourselves all day sometimes has that effect of, I want to just turn my camera off, which leads to the perception of, ooh, your camera's not on. That just means they're not engaged. And that's all about, hey, how, as a coach, do you help someone say, ask some questions, be curious. Hey, notice your camera was off, what's going on? Things like that. So I have no doubt that I have missed some questions and I apologize. And I am so grateful that you have been adding your comments and questions. So I'm going to ask you for one more as we tie up our webinar today is, what are you walking away with as a result of today's webinar? What one thing are you taking away? What are you going to do with it? Would be wonderful if you can ask a very coachy question of, yeah, sure, you have one thing, and what are you going to do with it? When are you going to use it? Who's your accountability partner? All those wonderful, fantastic things. So if you want to share that, I would love to hear or to read, I guess, if you wanted to look at it that way. And I know that we're coming up to time. So as you're doing that, as you're putting away or putting down what you want to what you're walking away with, what are you going to do with it? Yes, ask people what they want, how they want to be communicated, asking renewed curiosity, self-reflection is really important. Love these. I want to say with absolute heartfelt gratitude on behalf of me and the magical and wondrous Stephanie and all of us at Coaching Out of the Box, I wanted to say thank you. And I know that she had added the link to contact us if you have any questions about this webinar or our programs or. And I know that there's going to be an email with the presentation and it'll live on our website. Stephanie, anything that left you no time Anything that I've missed?
I don't think so. Our next webinar next month will be live coaching demos again, so back by popular demand. So
Those are always fun. So again, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and week, and happy spring.
thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Oh, how wonderful these questions are.